Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the show. And good morning, Mike. Waiting for us to actually start live on YouTube there. Okay, so welcome. So yesterday you put up this one thing that was about Flakka, the zombie drug.
Yes,
That's
because
actually pretty dangerous drug, isn't it?
it's one of the so-called. Well, we better welcome everybody. Welcome everyone to Talking Niagara today. Niagara, Ontario, Canada's and the world's foremost journalistic, opinionated.
Opinionated, yeah, opinionated, being very true.
Yes,
I admit to that. Yeah. Hey, am I highly opinionated? Yeah, number one in the world.
Fox got nothing on us.
Fox has got nothing on us. Yeah. It doesn't mean to say that we're going to agree on any opinion. Just when they're going to slag each other off and slag the world off.
Yeah. I mean, I think our listeners are very lucky because this is the only place to get the proper opinion of world events.
Yeah, you're wrong, and 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 you're wrong.
I've got the Trump syndrome. I know no one else does.
Okay, so you put one up yesterday, which we didn't get to, which was Flakka, the zombie drug. Now, this is an older article back to 2019, but I'm guessing that you would put this up about one of the kind of cross-border drugs that we're getting.
It's not just that; it's this drug could be manufactured in a bunch of different places.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It is less an issue than fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and those other drugs that come across our border or go back and forth across our border or the Mexican border. This is a so-called designer drug. And I believe this is probably the future of drug abuse going forward. Once we are able to control fentanyl and bring it down to levels. Go ahead.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, this drug, dependent upon who makes it, includes things like ecstasy, crystal meth, and some of these other MCAT, some of these things that MCAT and MDPV that I can't even pretend to enunciate.
Yeah, so this is one of the ones that ostensibly come from the sort of the bath salts. And the reason why I put it up there, because we're zeroing in on the typical drugs, but I think the future of drug abuse will be these designer drugs. Now, at the moment, they'll add anything to them, but this particular drug is called the zombie drug, which gives you a sense of euphoria and it gives you a sense of energy, but it does an incredible lot of damage. But in the meantime, it's very, very popular, or has been very popular. And the reason why I put it up here as the future of drugs, because once we begin to zero in on the typical drugs like Flakka will be more and more easy to get because
these can be made anywhere, can't they?
Yeah,
they're not dependent on specific ingredients, because you can change the ingredients on the fly.
Yeah, no, and you cannot find an article that'll tell you about, like, you can understand why heroin or cocaine or some of these others, because you can find articles on how they affect people and why they do them. But this particular drug, you'll see nothing but a whole lot of negative things, because people who use it can go quite mad and violent. Yeah. You're talking about stories about women gouging the eyes out of their grandmothers and things like that.
Things like it causes things like brain swelling and respiratory distress and renal failure. So if that's the case, I'm not surprised people are gouging relatives' eyes out.
Well, it's kind of like a combination of acid and heroin. It gives you a really good feeling, but it makes you paranoid and can make you very violent, suicidal, and all other things. It's called a zombie drug because it can really do superior, like unbelievable damage to your cells, your actual cell networks, which stiffen you up and make you walk like a zombie. And the reason why I put it, and also originally it produces like a catatonic like state in some people, but then the drug affects people in no other ways. No other drug has people who use it go mad, violent, and zombie like rampages.
Yeah.
The problem I have here is the reason why I put it up is it is extremely hard to control because the designation of an illegal drug is hard to put in place because the recipe can change all the time, and the recipe can be things that are otherwise innocuous or not thought to be drugs at all, but it can be, these things can be designed, and it takes a while for to designate it as a drug. And once it is, then the recipe just changes, and then they have to start all over again. So it's going to be very, very hard to control. It's going to be very hard to control because the ingredients for it are can be gotten rather easily, and cross borders and then combined. Like it is supposed to. One article I read on it is supposed to be sort of trying to accelerate the effects of the stimulant chat. Chat, of course, is this this mild drug that is chewed throughout the Middle East, Yemen, Oman, places like that, and it is a stimulant. It's kind of like the cocaine leaves that people chew in South America, because they relieve, they relieve exhaustion and all that kind of thing. So,
and what you were talking about, the ones that they do in the Middle East, they're not really done for drug effect. They're more done because they're somewhat like the chewing of, I suppose, is that there's the thing that I'm thinking about is actually licorice type. There's a licorice type of plant, isn't there, that has a very licoricey type of smell thing, which is pleasing to the mouth but doesn't cause any isn't like a drug.
Well, it's sometimes called cat, sometimes called chat, but it's a naturally occurring stimulant.
Yeah,
kind of like what is in the coca leaf. And once the coca leaf is refined, of course, then it becomes cocaine. This actually is actually made synthetically, and it was some people say that it was made to sort of emulate or synthetically concentrate the chat-like effects. But my whole issue here is that so here's the immediate side effects: immediate effects of euphoria, feeling of invulnerability, extreme stimulation, and loss of inhibitions. So it does a lot of what other drugs do. Like that sounds kind of like cocaine in a way, where people get
loss of inhibitions is a key factor about most drugs, isn't it?
Yeah, cocaine is the drug of choice for comedians and artists, particularly comedians. You'll find a lot of cocaine abuse, like when you think of the players in Saturday Night Live. There was cocaine all over the place. Fleetwood Mac, one of the players for Fleetwood Mac said during their time they must have, in her words, snorted a line of cocaine that was 7 miles long. In her estimation, I think that was Stevie Nicks that said that. But Chad has a similar effect. Yeah. Now, Chad has a very similar. It makes you feel good, but also makes you stimulant. So you feel euphoric. And it's unlike sort of heroin, where that euphoric feeling, you don't do much after they shoot up. You just kind of feel good all kind of day, and violence and that kind of thing is probably the last thing in your mind. But this, in other words, will stimulate you, give you the euphoria, or make you feel invulnerable. So it has a very appealing sort of high. However, because of how they make it, it becomes very, very problem. It causes muscle spasm, tremors, seizures, respiratory distress, renal failure, very much like some other kind of drugs, and hypoactive delirium. Often, a little bit like if you combine a bunch, if you get methamphetamine and combine it with cocaine, basically, it has the same. I'm trying to combine different drugs to come up with this. So, but the real point I'm putting here is the reason why the illicit drugs come into the country is because people like to take them, obviously, and that of course has caused 47,000 deaths in Canada from fentanyl. We can't count how many deaths may have come from heroin, et cetera, but they can be identified and traced, and their sources can be reduced or eliminated. But these designer synthetic drugs are different, and my fear is that they're going to be the drugs of choice going forward, and it's going to be very, very difficult for law enforcement to catch up to this. This may be the next scourge of our society, whereas fentanyl is right now. But if these synthetic type drugs take off, they're going to be hard for law enforcement to identify, and because they potentially can be easily made and distributed, like methamphetamine was early on in its incarnation. It was easy to make.
Well, interesting. Gary's made this point about, hey, council members putting people on contaminated land. Seriously, what's the difference with these drugs?
Yeah, that's a good point. We should get back to the environmental issues here in Niagara right now, in a way. But yeah, that's another issue too. Sort of, you can kind of relate it to the government is putting people on contaminated land or allowing contaminated land, but that's a different issue from what I'm talking about now, because I fear that these synthetic drugs will be very hard to identify, and because of their and the opportunity for them to pop up when fentanyl and other drugs are beginning to be eliminated and hard to find, these will then be the drug of choice. Varieties of zombie drugs will be available, and it's going to be hard, and it really could rip through society, because it's much harder to trace if the synthetic process. So it's not like where you have areas of factories where they're making fentanyl or refining cocaine and things like that. This could happen here and there and everywhere, kind of like a methamphetamine thing.
And Gary Wilkins makes the point, you can get the ingredients at your local home hardware. I'm not so sure it's as close as that, but or as easy as that, but point taken. That is one of the points here. Yeah. And hey, domestic cured. Just to let you know this comment, I'm not going to read it out.
Oh, I didn't expect I was supposed to be there. Sorry, Gary, and I had stuff to do. I didn't know I was supposed to be there to meet you there. Sorry about that, Gary.
Right. Okay.
I didn't get any message from you, I don't think.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, yeah, so this is basically just a new, and the worst of it is everything can be sourced locally, right?
Well, yeah, it's easy to get the stuff. I'm looking for a message I might have got from Gary, but missed.
It's okay. It's okay. You know, it's not the end of the world, Dave.
Yeah, sorry about that, Gary. But
Yeah.
I don't get I don't have a message here.
Yeah. Okay, so basically they're a mix of other ingredients, and they add things like ecstasy and crystal meth in the mix, which you can get, which are obviously banned drugs, but you can get through the right marketplace. And ingredients, while the ingredients do vary, there's some commonalities used.
Yeah, so that was my whole point of putting it up.
Yeah.
Um,
So basically, what you're saying is Trump's tariffs have no impact upon this.
they wouldn't have anything impact on this particular type of thing. The tariffs were a club basically to uh, make him look good, but it actually did in the end because guess what? We're chasing down fentanyl like crazy.
Yeah.
We've
Oh,
all
yeah.
kinds of resources to it. We have a fentanyl czar now. So say what you might about Trump, I don't agree with his methods, but shoot, we're zeroing in on some important issues because he said jump and we said how high. And
Well,
but it's interesting.
not only that, we actually jumped.
Yeah, but
And
there are
the trouble is, he's right in a way, because there are many things that our government has not been doing for quite some time, and not just, some of these things have not just been the current federal government, but have been past governments as well.
Well, there are things that Canada's very weak on. It's immigration, of course. One
Yeah.
thing I should point out here, though, with this was a deal that Trump made with Canada, and it made a deal with Mexico a little bit earlier to postpone the uh, tariffs. Now, the deal that was a two-way deal down in Mexico, where Mexico is, of course, trying to reduce the amount of migrants and working hard to try to reduce the amount of fentanyl. Uh, but what but the cartels are very, very powerful in Mexico, and they've had wars against the cartels in Mexico. Cartels in Mexico are responsible for political assassination. One of their last elections, they had over 40 of their candidates murdered. So the cartels are very strong, and one of the reasons why they're very strong is because of the amount of weapons that come in from the United States into Mexico. Part of the deal that Claudia Sheinbaum made with Trump is, yeah, we're going to put more troops on the border, and we're going to try to increase our fight against fentanyl. But this is what you have to do. You have to stop the weapons coming in from the United States that supply the cartels. The American weapon makers are making a huge amount of money from the cartel money buying these weapons, and it's a thing that's not often said. You'll not see it on the news, but you'll find articles about that where Claudia Sheinbaum says, if you want to have a terrorist organization, how about the gun manufacturers in the United States who produce these things and well know where they're going? They well know who's buying them and well know how they're going to be used. They kind of look the blind eye to make big profits supplying guns to the cartel. So they have an agreement with Trump to zero in on some of these, particularly the more dangerous firearms from going into the Mexico via the United States. But the states has been in denial of that quite a bit, and part of the denial was the NRA lobbying for the gun thing. So that's something you don't often hear. Okay, Trump forced them to do this, but there was a deal made, and Scheinbaum, as part of her, okay, we're going to try to help do what you say, but you got to do something too.
Yeah.
You got to stop that gun flow. We're having a hard time fighting the cartels, and one of the reasons is the supply of weapons that come in from the U.S. So the fentanyl's going one way, and the guns are going the other.
Yeah. In fact, actually, there was a program I saw a few months back that was speculating upon what was going up to the US was the fentanyl. What was coming back was crates of weapons, not money.
Yes, and the U.S. knows it, and
Yeah.
it's like when the U.S. complains that Mexico kind of looks the other way when the cartels are making drugs and money's coming into Mexico through the drugs, but they're doing the same thing regarding weapons.
And exactly what they were doing. What they were doing is they were. I don't know how or whether it was fictionally done, but they were following these people who put a load of drugs onto a plane, flew them across the Gulf of Mexico, I'm presuming in somewhere like Texas, and the return trip was just basically load up with guns and take them back.
Yeah. So there's a dual problem there, and the designation of the cartels as a terrorist group hopefully will employ more resources to fight the group as a terrorist organization, which will provide much more resources to it. But on the U.S. side, they have to accept responsibility for the guns that are keeping the cartels so powerful.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Tariffs won't come into effect in Ghana, and we need to take care of our borders, says Gary.
Okay. Trump will make our borders great again.
Once in a blue moon, I buy a bunch of flowers, walk over to Timmy's, Wendy's, and is connected, pass them to the women, hugs. Yeah, okay. All right.
Nice. Very nice.
Good deed is all, right? Yep. Right. How can they stop something that was introduced by the big guys? It's the small ones we don't want.
Is she referencing the drugs or the tariffs?
I'm presuming the drugs.
Well, there is that too. Who's making money behind the scenes? When the Taliban first controlled Afghanistan, they reduced the opium trade by 93%. They almost completely eliminated.
Yeah.
And when NATO went in there and then the Americans stayed after a while, the drug production went through the roof in areas where the Allies were controlling it, and they did not come down on drug production. When the Taliban got back in just recently, they've reduced the amount of opium that is used for heroin and so on. So they've eliminated that for religious reasons, and I have to always wonder who's making money off of this. Remember back when the Golden Triangle was the thing, and the CIA was connected with drug trafficking with the mob in Marseille. That movie, The French Connection, where heroin was coming out of France. But the opium for that was coming out of the Golden Triangle, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia, that area there. And yes, he will, Dave. I don't know what that was for, but
thank God.
So the CIA was involved in making money off of that help to supply the weapons to the warlords in Indochina that were also fighting the Viet Cong.
Okay, so one of the things that Gary is also pointing out is, do you not recall years ago we used to buy parts for guns? 8 orders later, you had a 30-30.
Yes, yeah, quite right. But guns weren't such an issue. Like my father had a revolver, and it was legal. And I remember that I was there as a little kid when he sold it to a guy came to there. He put it, so.
Keeping on broadly the same topic, let's move on to this other article about the real reason for Donald Trump's tariffs, because this is an article that investigates an article that was written by Stephen Moran called A User's Guide to Reconstructing the Global Trading System. And this is this author, Stephen Moran, is actually a member, is a chair of Trump's Council of Economic Advisors. And he sets out the case that tariffs are basically a powerful tool to restore American economic dominance. Tariffs and currency policy are aimed at improving the competitive of American manufacturing by increasing our industrial plant and reallocating an aggregate demand and jobs from the rest of the world to the US. So the gradual implementation is supposed to minimize disruption while currency depreciation in tariffed countries offsets the inflation to US customers.
Well,
and we're seeing that here in Canada because our currency has been going down.
Well, that's a problem for the US because in oddly enough, the US wants to devalue their own currency, and they have done that once, I think, in the 80s. They want to devalue their own currency because one of the problems with their exports is the dollar is too high and thought to be artificially high because other nations are so reliant on it. The reserve currency, you want to have the U.S. as the reserve currency for the world, so the world can have a steady common currency that it can trade in country to country.
Yeah. But the whole point about that reserve currency, at one point, the British pound used to be there, and it was the highest, it was and still remains to some extent the highest valued, one of the highest valued currencies in the world. And that, unfortunately, is what happens to the US dollar. But of course, the US doesn't want it that high.
No, not right now. And the British currency was the reserve currency until after the two wars. Two wars decimated the British wherewithal. And at that point, after the war, the reserve currency switched to the American dollar.
Yeah, and certainly by the 60s, that was all over for Britain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it talks here about devaluing the okay, go ahead.
And whilst Britain has a high value currency, it isn't the reserve currency for the world anymore. That is one of the reasons why, of course, the US wants to make its currency attractive on the money markets, right? And therefore keep the value quite low.
Well, it's not so much the attractiveness of the American currency. It is making U.S. goods more competitive outside the country because American goods are produced and sold with American price tag on it. And if they can devalue the U.S. dollar, which they have done successfully back in the 80s, that will make U.S. goods more competitive. That's a problem, too. The U.S. currency is so strong that like for instance, against the Canadian dollar, like we got like 68 cents for every one of their dollars, which means if we make a widget, it's worth 68 cents for a dollar. It's worth 68 cents in the US. If the US makes a widget for a dollar, it cost us more money. So we wouldn't buy the one from the United States. We would buy the one we made. And that's kind of the rationale behind that. It is thought that the U.S. Dollar is overvalued, and if it comes down, it would improve American exports.
Yeah,
and it would also reduce the ability of Americans to buy as much stuff offshore, which would then make domestic-made stuff more attractive.
But they're spewing another policy here because we're basically saying by utilizing this policy, it's not they're going what is called America first, but that doesn't mean America is alone, right? They're trying to basically say put America back in the leading position. And if you think about it, that actually is in alignment with Trump's whole MAGA policy anyway.
Yeah. Now the reliance on tariffs, Trump likes to cite McKinley, and McKinley used tariffs effectively, but at that time he wasn't the president. He was he was in government, but he wasn't the president. He came up with the tariff things a little later on when he was the president. He now had to reduce the tariffs. He was switching away from tariffs because tariffs had done its job. So when Trump talks about President McKinley, at the time President McKinley was the president, he was moving away from tariffs because they had already done their job, and now we're doing the opposite of what they wanted. They needed to trade fluently with the rest of the world because they had built up their industrial base, and now they were prepared to go on and compete on the world market. But the tariffs were up there to protect the domestic industries for a time, and this brought a lot of money into the Treasury, U.S. Treasury, but it's quite a bit different. And the two different times are different because at that time, the United States was a rural, not an industrial country. After the Civil War, it was basically 80% of the people still lived on farms. And when it was switching over to an industrial economy, it had a domestic market a huge domestic market that it could turn to, but it had to stop or make less attractive goods coming from offshore so they could build up their own. Once they did build that up, then they didn't like the tariffs too much because they got retaliatory tariffs from other countries. So then they tried to reduce that. So it's a very interesting way they're doing it. The Trump tariffs, the ones that just came out that were canceled, are not the problem. They won't go into an effect because, according to Kevin Leary, who I watched the other day, he says the 17 states in the United States, number one trade partner is Canada. So 17 states are in very big trouble when there's a trade war with Canada. The rest of the United States could probably float it pretty good. But as far as Canada concerned, 17 states would be in tough shape because we are the number one trading partner of those states, individual states.
But again, I think there's an element of we need to start to think about non-US trade in some way.
Well, this has been spoken about, as I said, as far as I remember. We probably brought it up in the show a dozen times. We are totally reliant on the United States. But what does Trump really want to do? And Lutnick, his man there, basically Lutnick made it very clear that there's a two-phase tariff thing that was going to come. The first one was the club to kind of sort of force everybody to the border and fentanyl things. But the other part of it, the more insidious, if you will, tariff, are going to be targeted tariffs. What Lutnick wants to do is to bring auto manufacturing out of Canada and into the United States. So that's one of the things he wants to do. That means he wants to target the auto industry with tariffs in Canada, so that the auto industries will just pack up shop and come into the United States. So he wants to make it as difficult as he can for American auto producers to produce and sell easily. And he, well knowing that we have exclusive reliance on the United States for trade in this particular case, and that's what he wants to do. And they're, of course, not picking on China so much and trying to get the industry back from China. They're picking easier targets, ones closer to home, like Mexico and Canada, knowing that we were extremely vulnerable to tariffs, and that would probably work if given enough time.
Right.
This type of targeted tariff that is supposedly going to begin after April are the ones that we really have to be concerned about.
Yeah. And actually, Rebecca Shelley, Executive Director of Grimsby and District Chamber of Commerce, is saying that the chamber network across Ontario, even Canada, has been very quick in communicating with contact about the tariff situation with the US, and they're basically saying that we need to take this time to actually reassess and well, she's saying strengthen relationships with American business, and wants to see Canadian businesses and governments to work together to remove interprovincial trade barriers and find customers outside of the US. Absolutely, it's exactly a repeat of what we've been saying here.
Yeah, but I'll repeat this too, that this is being said over and over and over again for the last 50 years. It is really
about time that they've got to take action. If you want to save,
good.
If you want to save Canadian stuff, we've got to take action.
Well, they always say so, but then when the threat is gone, then they go back to their old ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
When the first NAFTA agreement came on, which was good, it caused free. It was an excellent agreement, unlike any in the world at the time, that allowed free trade across the border. It made us even more reliant on the Americans because it was easy now to trade with them because we had this particular agreement that made it very easy. It reduced regulations, and it was also making people on both sides of the border more wealthy. It was a stimulant to both countries, and including Mexico. But the real problem there was made us even more reliant on the trade to the United States because it's easy. Year after year after year after year, you always hear the same thing from some quarter in Canada. We have to diversify our markets. We have to reduce restrictions to interprovincial trade. Like we trade more with the United States. Our regions, our provinces trade more with the United States than we do with each other provinces.
And like the Keystone, we've had more issues about the Cross Canada pipeline, and more interruptions to the implementation of that pipeline than they did with Keystone the whole way.
Yeah, well, it depended on the administration going back and forth, and unfortunately, but the interconnection between the trade relationships right now, it'd be pretty hard to implement tariffs that would be that you could maintain for very long as it is. Like I said before, the more insidious one, as far as we're concerned, is the targeted long-term plan to attract industries into the United States, and of course the targeting of Ontario auto plants is going to be the next one of the ones. This is very sad that they couldn't think of North America as a trading unit, that they want to reduce the abilities of their neighbors to produce and sort of hog the big production to themselves. I think this is wrong-minded, basically, very wrong-minded idea because of the interconnection between the countries as it is now. And we will not ever be able to trust Americans for any subsequent trade deals if these things keep going on. When you have a trade deal that was inked by Trump, he took the NAFTA agreement, reconfigured it, and called it USMCA. It was very similar to the one before, and he touted it as the best trade deal ever. It was the best thing for the United States, that he himself assured that it was much more beneficial to the United States than the one before, and it wasn't anything much different. As a matter of fact, Canada then had a surplus where it did not have a surplus prior to that. But the surplus is all just oil. Everything else that's produced, cars like the United States has a surplus for cars. They have a surplus for pots and pans, for furniture, everything. So they have a surplus in Canada. The only thing that that balances that surplus in our favor is oil, and oil only. Take that out of the equation, and they make and sell more stuff in Canada than we sell in the United States.
And of imported oil, the majority of what US gets comes from either Canada or Mexico. There's a much higher percentage comes from those two countries than does it come from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Canada's for the oil that the U.S. cannot produce. It needs 20. Basically, it needs 20 million barrels a day to sustain its own country, the needs of its own country. It only produces 13 million, so it needs to bring in 6 or 7 more million barrels a day.
The interesting
percent of that, 4 million barrels comes from Canada every day. So we're the first supplier of this need, and the third supplier of that need is Mexico, somewhere in between, and maybe Saudi or something else.
No, Saudi's actually the third supplier, not the. It's Canada, Mexico, and then Saudi.
Oh, really? I thought it was.
No, this was.
Well, I know Saudi only gives about 6%, but I thought anyway. But it doesn't really matter.
The Mexicans are about 18 to 20%.
Okay, so there you have it.
Yeah,
and Trump says they got enough oil underneath the ground that they don't need our oil, but they can't produce it right now, obviously.
Yeah,
they don't. They produce only 13 million gallons or million barrels, but they need 20 million.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is about that is when you think about where our oil reserves are east of the Rocky Mountains, where Mexico's oil reserves are east of what would be the Rocky Mountains down there, where Texas is east of the Rocky Mountains. Hey, there's actually a swath of oil. There must be a swath of oil east of the Rocky Mountains that isn't being tapped into in the US.
Well, there's all kinds of look. I think the United States has the 10th largest reserves.
Yeah,
Canada has the third largest reserves. A lot of the American stuff, and there you have also the fact that American shale oil is a much sweeter crude, and the refineries in the States are all geared up for heavy crude, which was the traditional crude they got out. But the fracked crude is a lighter, and it's not easy. They don't have the refineries for it. So basically, what they take their light crude and trade it, sell that light crude, and import heavy crude. It's an odd system.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So we've kind of run the gambit of tariffs again, and I'm sure that's a topic we'll be coming back to at a certain point. Right. Anything else on tariffs?
No, but I do like to reiterate that point about Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, made a deal, and it was a two-way deal. It wasn't that she was just bending at the knee, but she got from Trump promises to stop guns coming into Mexico. Yeah. The argument, we don't hear it so often, but the argument between the United States and Mexico has always been, you're letting too much fentanyl and immigrants in from your border into our country, and the part of the response is part of that happens because we have powerful cartels that are getting their weapons from you. Yeah, so you're manufacturing weapons, and your gun manufacturers are making huge profits selling guns to the cartel. So the guns go into Mexico and the fentanyl comes back. They're connected. Like, you help us reduce the power of the cartels, by helping us reduce the amount of gun power they have.
All right. Okay. And I think that's, different, slightly different problems that we have, but yeah. There you go. All right.
You got to watch too, like how this is put out in the press. We do know that Trump, Colombians were not going to take the refugees back to their country. It wasn't that. When all that came up, the Colombians refused to take these refugees back. But it wasn't really that. They didn't like the way they were being bound up and handcuffed and put into military transport. That was their objection. What the press didn't tell you, and that Colombia has been extremely cooperative to the United States for a very long time. It has willingly taken back its migrants quite often without any resistance. And it has been doing trade deals and other cooperation with the United States very much for the last little while. The objection came when they were putting them into military transports and handcuffing them. The Colombians thought that was indignant. So what they did was they flew a plane up to put them in a plane of their own to take them back. But it really looked like that Trump clubbed them with the threat of tariffs. But if you get to the bottom of it, the Colombians were not saying we're not going to take them, and Trump says we're going to tariff you to death if not. And the Colombian guy was saying, you're not listening. I'm going to take them back, but I don't like the way you're doing it.
Yeah.
And, so the whole thing looks as if Trump clubbed them with threats of heavy tariffs if they didn't take them back. Well, they had always taken them back. They had taken them back for years now. They've cooperated with the United States in bringing their
that's part of
these back. So that's the story, how it gets skewed in the press.
And that's a part of the issue about what they didn't even realize about some of the things that Canada was saying about its border response, and he wasn't even aware of it until recently. So
he claims that he wasn't informed about the 1.3 billion dollars, 900 million American, but 1.3 billion Canadian dollars devoted to the border. But of course, then he can always say that he says Canada is bent at the knee and is very, very successful. But on the other hand, I have to congratulate him that he's made us very, very, very aware of our vulnerability in a big way. And in the end, it will probably help us because we'll look for, if we do go look for other markets, it would help us.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on. Quebec Union is planning legal action against Amazon over closures of closures of warehouses in Quebec.
Yeah, Amazon is closing its distribution centers in Quebec, and it says, well, they weren't that efficient, but the workers in that Amazon plant became unionized in 2022, and now they're closing up Amazon. Amazon has fought unionization everywhere it is, and this is a demonstration to anyone else. There is one other Amazon plant that has unionized workers, and I think that's in Staten Island in New York, in that area, or some area like that. But everywhere else, Amazon has fought the unions in their plant, and this is a big demonstration because it's a rather smaller market. They can use local distributors to send the stuff out, and this is a big message to all the different other Amazon plants everywhere. If you unionize, we're going to close you down.
And actually, the interesting thing is about what you say. So you think to yourself, well, how are we going to get, knowing where the Amazon depot is, and you think to yourself, well, they're promising to get me this tomorrow, right? This product, but it's not going to ship from there to here in one day. How the hell are they getting it to me? And that's because they've got now a vast array of local networks, and even local distribution centers now actually have some stock of the most popular items that are bought in that area.
Yeah, it would just mean overall delay. What Amazon will do is ship them to local delivering places that would have a warehouse and so on.
There's 2 or 3 companies in the Niagara region that deal with Amazon delivery. One of the ones that deals with Niagara Falls is based out of Thorold, and they maintain, as far as I understand, they maintain some stock there. Some stock.
I have a problem with Amazon because I know of a guy who hurt his back there, and he was railroaded out and suddenly found himself a layoff. And he was not the type of person that had the ability to fight it. He was a very poor guy, but he got a job there, and he was doing fairly well. He hurt his back. And if you know this guy, it's not a fake back industry injury. And he did what he was supposed to do, report it. And then before too long, boom, he's gone. That's what Amazon does. I like Amazon to be able to deliver the stuff that I need right away.
But these delivery companies are not Amazon.
What?
But these delivery companies, Dave, are not Amazon. They're not actually, they're independent.
No, I know. But Amazon itself, when they had Amazon warehouse in and around Toronto area, that's where the guy worked. So
they've still got one. They've still got one there. They've got another one in Hamilton, I believe, as well.
But my point is I don't like Amazon for what they did to the workers. And in this particular case, they're dumping a lot of employees that were counting on that work. They had nice, secure work. They were union protected. They could go to work every day. So what Amazon does not want your protection. And the point I made with a fellow that I know who hurt his back in Amazon was got rid of without unfairly got rid of because he was injured. So they dumped him. If there was a union there, he would have been protected. Amazon doesn't want you to have that kind of protection.
Yeah.
And
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from in that regard.
So they don't. They wanted to get rid of the union. Unfortunately, that's the trends these days with a lot of companies, is they don't want that responsibility for their workers. It's a lot cheaper for them if you get hurt on the job is to find a reason to get rid of you. If you get a little older on the job, they'll find a reason to lay you off. That kind of thing. They will promote who they want instead of going by the rules. That's my turn to be promoted, kind of thing. We can pay Joe over there only 2/3 of what you are being paid, so we're going to promote him into the job. So the unions have their problems, but at the bottom, they protect people. And then we can see what's happening now. Look what Amazon did to all those Quebec workers. They cut them loose, and now they don't have a job. They had a nice, secure job, and now they don't. And that makes them feel very vulnerable, I'm sure. And it will scare the crap out of every other Amazon employee across North America. And no one's going to go ask for a raise now.
Well, we're often with a company like that, either you get raises on a regular basis, or basically you get the amount of money that you negotiate when you sign on is the same amount of money as you're still earning N years later whenever you decide to leave.
Yeah, so you can imagine. You're struggling away. You haven't had a raise for a long time, and you go to your boss and say, "Look, man, I've been working here for 15 years, and my salary hasn't gone up much. I do a good job every day. I'd like to have a raise." and the next thing you know, you got a layoff notice,
Yeah.
and there's nothing you can do because
It's,
all they have to do is say, "Oh well, we had to lay off people." It's a very, very difficult thing to go through the government and fair work uh, fair
yeah.
work legislation. It's hard to do that. Um, when I worked beside non-union guys at different companies where we're doing work and they're doing some other kind of construction work in the place, but they're a non-union outfit. I asked them, they're always going for more and more hours. They like hours. I says, well, they don't get overtime, right? They're only supposed to be working 60 hours before they get overtime. Do any of them ask for that overtime? No, we don't even mention it because if we do, we're going to be laid off.
Yeah.
And one guy told me that he'd been working with a guy for a while, and he wanted he wanted to claim the overtime that he had worked legally worked, and as soon as he did, he was gone 5 days later.
Yeah. You think they'd be a bit more imaginative on the layoff period? Okay, let's go in a completely different direction. Because we've only got a short amount of time left. Carbon dating puts the Saskatchewan Indigenous archaeological site at 11,000 years old. Wow! When I see a headline like that, yeah, that's pretty key. Way before European involvement.
I have to say that I'm expecting that plumber today,
I
so I
know.
might have to leave abruptly.
Yep, I know. We'll
And
deal with
there's only
that.
a couple minutes left in our show anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is I thought I'd put it in there for the interest of the average listener that in and of course Chris might be happy because this is kind of a Science Friday kind of thing. Now the archaeologists are continually turning back the date at which they feel indigenous people in North America were settled. There's long arguments. There could have been two different waves of people. There could have been actually a Caucasian element to some of the early migrants that came out of Siberia, but mostly it's the people of the indigenous people of North and South America trace their ancestries basically to the people of Siberia that were there at the time. Now, what's happened here at Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, they found that this particular site is 1,000 years older than they suspected. They trying to figure out where the indigenous people settled, how they migrated, and they're pushed back to 11,000 years in this particular case here. Now, we do know the Clovis people were around 14,000 years, right? And the date keeps going back because they find archaeological evidence that even predates that. But what makes this significant is it's in Saskatchewan, and it follows traditional stories.
Yeah.
So the sort of the stories handed down from one generation to the other turned out to be quite rather true here, because the elders sort of said, well, this is the area where there should have been an encampment back many years ago, such and such. And when the archaeologists explored, yes, indeed, they did find it.
Yeah.
And
the interesting thing is about this is on the Saskatchewan River, so it's an important site for people to have lived because their interaction with the river gave them a lot of water, the water that they needed. Also, it brought animals, which was helped hunting.
Yeah, it was a good place to get bison, according to the bones they found.
Yeah.
Now here it says the findings match oral histories that elders in the area told researchers. That's why I pointed this out. Finding an archaeological find like that is very fascinating to me, but probably not too fascinating to many others. But the fact that the oral histories that maintain themselves for 11,000 years. which makes it important to zero in on a lot of these old elder type tales.
The oral histories are fascinating, because they seem to be true to, what people have discovered in almost all instances.
Now, this is at a period when the glaciers were just beginning to recede. So it must have been a very cold area. And when you hear somebody talking about these huge, so there was floods too. Floods in the area, which they have identified probably from backed up glacier water and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So and the floods may have been the thing that preserved. So yeah, that particular place was also where migratory animals at that time, post glaciation, as the glaciers were receding, this was another ideal place for encampments because many sorts of migratory animals moved through there. So of course that was their food source. I just thought that was rather fascinating that the elders' histories identified a site and knows that history had been passed down for 11,000 years.
Yeah.
Randy West says, what did Randy West say?
Yeah. There you go.
What would make you believe that the human race isn't tremendously old and could even predate dinosaurs? It's simply possible that the evidence you need is under the floor of the sea. I don't think the human race
I don't think so, but it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that the human race is anywhere near that old. Like
I think it is older than we state. The human race, I think, dates back to most archaeological evidence at the moment seems to point to 50,000 years. I would say probably at least 100,000.
No,
there's been evidence.
The form of human that we are now. Like you have to talk about hominids, and
I know.
There was a whole lot of different branches, but I suppose the Cro-Magnon man in Europe was the first proto Homo sapien. They were a little bit different from us, but very close, all in all. The human beings as Homo sapien, the best guess they have now is that it migrated out of someplace in Africa where the mutated genes of some other hominid started to happen, and we were created and maintained ourselves from that point on. Now that could have been 100,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago, and there are 3 places in Africa where that happened. Now where it gets complicated is branches of humans moved out of Africa, then turned around and come back. The first waves of humans that went into Europe and out of Africa
actually
were not successful. And they came back, and the next waves were more
successful. Most of the waves that came out of Africa, it's only the last wave that ever got to Europe. Most of the waves because out of Africa predate the European migration.
Well, you got to see where humans were going. They were going east, west, north, and other places in Africa. So it's not an easy story.
No, it's not.
We reported on this show a little while ago that the first wave of humans that went into Africa and met the Neanderthals didn't do that well, and became extinct at the same time the Neanderthals were becoming extinct. It was the next wave, subsequent waves of humans that came in that established themselves, and the ones that established themselves most firmly in the beginning were the Cro-Magnon man, which is a human being, but with some differences. They were a stronger, more robust human than we are today. Not like Neanderthals or anything like that, but they did have distinctiveness, and probably there was an evolutionary adaptation for land, like the evolutionary adaptation of white skin, that would allow more vitamin D to be processed in the body.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Okay. And we've got a story we'll get back, some other stories we'll get back to tomorrow.
yes, indeed. Without further ado, I bid you adieu. And the monstrous Trump is planning, although I'm not so sure how serious it is, he's planning an ethnic cleansing of Gaza. He wants the United States to take over Gaza and get rid of the people that are there and push them into human-friendly areas around, humanitarian friendlies around. In other words, code for we're going to get rid of them for the Israelis and never let them back in. We'll see how far that goes.
Yeah, I find that appalling.
Yes.